Okay, so in this video we're going to kind of branch into this discussion of generics, and it's really in this area where you can really customize the C# language and improve on it and make it work for whatever purpose that you have in a program. So for example, well, let me just start. In this program we're going to mimic a dozen eggs, okay? So I have a simple egg class, and only one data member here, a Boolean to specify the cracked status, and just a couple of simple constructors and a property block. Okay, so that's the egg. And then what I want to do is create a list of eggs, but very specifically, the list is going to represent a dozen eggs, exactly a dozen eggs. Now, if I were to use our usual list, just the basic list that we've been using for several weeks now, that's all well and good. And that list is going to be able to, you're going to be able to use that for the vast majority of your tasks and your programming tasks. But in this case, I'm not sure that list would be so appropriate, because we know that if you add, if you exceed the size of a list, for example, or the capacity of a list, that the list will just double in size naturally. You don't have to worry about the size of the list. Well, in this example, I want the list to represent a dozen eggs, meaning exactly 12 eggs. I don't want the list to be doubling in size if I add a 13th egg or whatever, so I'm not sure that would be appropriate. So I'm gonna create a custom list to represent an actual carton of eggs. So what I've done is I've added a new class, just adding a class as we always do, and I'm going to call it carton. This is going to represent the carton of eggs, the dozen eggs. And if you notice, now this is a container class. It's going to mimic a list of type egg. So right away you can see the syntax is a little different. Creating a custom list, okay, which is itself a new class, a new homemade class that we're working on. I'm going to talk about this. It does implement the IEnumerable interface. Let me put that on the back burner and I'll talk about it later. So in the custom carton class here, I'm going to define a list of type egg. It's going to be called dozen. This is the exact dozen, 12 eggs, and I'm limiting it to 12 items, okay, as would be expected. Now the thing is, when you're creating a custom list, you do have to code some of the overhead. You have to code a method to add items to the list, remove items from the list, access individual items from the list. So even the count method, or the count property, I should say, you have to write the code for that. Here I'm just, and you know, it's like a kind of the list. This is just the regular list that we know well at this point and we've been using. You know it has a count property, you know it has an add method and all that. So it's like your container class contains a classic list, and you can draw upon all those methods that you've been drawing upon and using, but you still have to provide the functionality in your container class, okay? And within the container class, you'll access those classic methods here. So for example, I'm creating a count property for my custom list, my carton list, but within it, this is nothing special. I'm just returning the count property of this guy, dozen, which is the list that we know and love at this point. And same thing with the add here. The only difference here, I'm just calling upon the classic add method that we've used many times at this point, but I'm adding a twist. I'm adding some functionality. If it's less than 12, then it's going to just sail right in if the count is less than 12. And remember, the count is 0 based, so that's why it's 12 here and not 13. So basically, yeah, so if they exceed the capacity of the list, then I'm going to send a message that the carton is full. Okay, removing, not a big deal. It's just whatever egg is being removed, we'll remove that using the classic remove from the classic list. And then this is strange syntax that we haven't seen before, but if you want to be able to access an individual item in that list with array notation, meaning the square brackets, then you have to write this code, okay? And there should be an example of this type of syntax in your book, even though it's not an egg example, but it's more of a business type of example. Now, here's the thing. If I want to be able to iterate through the carton of eggs using a for each loop, like for example in the form, that's exactly what I'm going to do when we go over to the form class. If I want my custom list to have that capability to be able to just pick through it one item at a time and examine one item at a time, like with a for each loop, I've got to implement IEnumerable, the IEnumerable interface. That's one of the framework class library interfaces. I said there in the last video there are a small handful of interfaces that, library interfaces that you will find useful. And this is one that, as I said, if you want to do a custom list and loop through it with a for each, then you absolutely must implement IEnumerable. So these are the two methods that you have to implement if you're, have to define if you're implementing IEnumerable. The syntax is strange. It's something that we haven't seen. I think actually this one will probably fill in automatically, and then this one you would have to code. And I don't think I'm going to get into an explanation of this unusual code here, unusual for us at least in this video, but we basically have to implement those two. And so over here in the form, so now we're home free. I can go over to the form class here, and I'm creating a carton of eggs. I'm calling it Dozen Farm Fresh. It'll be a carton of eggs. And in the form load, I'm populating, just adding a bunch of eggs. Most of them are not cracked, but I have 2 cracked eggs in here where I've provided a true for the is cracked. This is a 13th egg. And when I try to add that, you'll see when I run the program, I'm going to get a message box saying the list is full because it's rejecting that 13th egg. Okay. And then here is the for each. There's an inspect button. I'll just run it real quick. Okay, that's the 13th egg I'm trying to add. Okay, fine. And now I'm going to inspect the carton. Okay, 2 of the eggs are cracked. So everything's working. And the inspect button here is I'm creating an integer for the number cracked. And then I'm using a for each loop to just loop through my list of eggs, my carton of eggs, and determine if it's cracked. And just getting the is cracked property on my egg, on each individual egg. And if it is, then I'm incrementing that number. But the point is, in order for me to be able to use this for each like this on my custom list, that list has got to implement IEnumerable. And just to prove my point, I'm going to go over and comment that out. Okay, I'm going to comment this out. All right, and also these 2. And now I'm going to go to the form, and let me see, I'm going to run this. Okay, well, I can't because I have an error. Let's see what it says. Okay, it's not as explicit as I would like, but basically I can't use the for each because I did not, my carton class does not implement IEnumerable because I commented it out. So anyway, that's a custom list. It's certainly unusual to have to use one of these in my class at the academic level, but it's something that you just want you to know that this option exists. And as I said, this is where you're really getting into customizing the language to fit some very, very specific needs in whatever scenario you might come across out in the real world.